You probably know that change is going to happen. The question is, do you like it? Oh, by the way, you don't have to like it. You have to deal with it. And we have an expert on the matter with us here today. Hello and welcome, Dr. Kelly Monahan.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much for making the time. And yeah, we get straight into it. When we talk about change, many people say, okay, look, AI changed basically everything, and I don't even know where to start. At the same time, we have a generational change. Roughly in about 5 years, the whole boomer generation will be fully retired, and two or three generational gaps are coming up to be covered very quickly. At the same time, people tell you, yeah, we have to deal with all of that change. By the way, we don't have much time. Could you please do it quickly? So,
That's
how,
right.
so let's start with AI. When people now say AI changes everything, and especially in decision making or for leadership levels, they often say, I see it sort of everywhere, but I really don't know where to start and
hmm
how can I use it? How can I find my starting point? Because many executives at the moment think they are losing out on it because they are not close enough to the topic. What's your advice on that? Because you work for the big consultancy companies, you are close to that executive level.
Yes, absolutely. Basically my client right now is both executive level and board. There's two realities right now that I think are scaring leaders. The very first is that AI is democratizing intelligence. So leaders are where they are today because of their 30 plus years of experience, and they have the most knowledge in their organizations. That changes dramatically when you think about AI. AI,
Hmm.
I always say this, I took 10 years in higher ed, spent a lot of money, a lot of effort in education. I've got an AI digital Kelly, digital twin. I was able to train that and all of my PhD level of knowledge in a matter of minutes. And now, of course, it has some hallucinations, but so do humans to some degree. We're not 100%, accurate. So I think that's really a game changer for leadership is what is your superpower if it's no longer the knowledge and experience that you have in that seat? We can talk about what that means. The second thing, and this is a hard reality too, is that AI is causing smaller teams to win. So I think that expectation, especially coming from the board level, is if you have AI, I'm expecting less people on your
Hmm.
team. And oftentimes we promoted leaders because they're building territories, they're building higher functions, they're taking on more responsibility, managing more people. I actually think the inverse is going to be true is we're going to be looking for leaders who can do more with less and manage
Hmm.
human AI teams. So those are two harsh realities that I think are really difficult for leaders as we think about that playbook that we've all, been trained on. And so where do leaders start from now? One, it's educating themselves on what are those leadership skills that they now need? And they're going to be the messy, human centered skills that we've tended to offload to HR for many years. That's going to
Hmm.
become a leadership responsibility. It's going to be a lot more around governance and how we manage and who we hold accountable for AI decision making. So it's for me as a leadership researcher, I'm super stoked and excited about this, but I also understand boots on the ground. This is going to be a harsh reality and a really difficult transition.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you say to leaders who think they fear about their job when they say, hey, look, I'm maybe in the age of 50 plus. I'm probably not the quickest
Yep.
learner on that matter. I'm not a digital native. What do you tell people who say maybe as a manager they're going to replace me because they think this can now be done by AI?
My biggest advice is go work with a Gen Zer. Go work with a young person. So for me, like we know research is going to be one of the most disrupted areas. AI agents in particular are really good at research. My world
Yeah.
is upside down. First thing I went and did is hired a freelancer who is half my age to say, what would you do if you were like coming to this job as a researcher? How would you use AI to do this job? I was blown away by how they thought about the
Hmm.
process. I was introduced to a brand new tool set. So to me, we've talked a lot about like reverse mentorship in organizations. This is actually the time, though, for senior leaders in particular, if you're 45 plus, to go hire that Gen Z or go hire that freelancer and get that one on one coaching. Because for some reason, the younger people, like I've got a 12-year-old nephew, he's telling me all the time, Aunt Kelly, did you try this? Look at this tool. Look at how I did this. I'm blown away. It's so intuitive. Like
Hmm.
there's no fear there. And I think for a lot of us, we have that fear, which we know from a change management perspective really gets in the way of having us learn. So that's my number one advice is go work with a young person and figure out how your job changes.
Excellent. And that's the perfect segue talking about the generational gap we have. Many
Yeah.
managers and executives say, look, I really love to work with young person people because we all know we have to pass things on to keep businesses thriving. However, the friction between different approaches to work couldn't be more difficult compared to where we are right now. When people say, look, I work in big consultancy and the way I work myself up, the ladder up was long hours, hard work, 50, 60 hours or even more. If you're in Europe, of course, you couldn't do that officially due to working laws. However, now they say I have people who talk about work-life balance. However, they have the expectations of XYZ payment, but not XYZ hours. How do I manage someone when there's so much friction going on between how I think work should be and how they think they want to work?
Yeah. So I call this the Gen Z paradox right now because what's happening is Gen Z is entering into a labor market that's beginning to contract, especially in the STEM education field. So back, this summer, the number third college educated degree that was having the hardest time finding a job, computer science, which is unheard of, right? I mean,
Oh,
we told everyone
wow.
go become a coder,
That was
get
the
computer
job
science.
guarantee back in
That
my
was the
days. Yes.
job.
Yeah.
Yes. And so a whole bunch of Gen Zers went and got a really expensive computer science degree. And now they're the ones who are struggling alongside anthropology degrees. And that's a paradox in and of itself as we go through this transition. So the rules of the game are changing. And not just that, at least here in the United States, the cost of living has exponentially increased. So over the last 35 years, average cost of goods and services, 567%. You want to talk about price of education? 1,700% increase.
Wow.
Price of a house, 1,800%. So Gen Z is not
Ah,
seeing it like for us in the States, anyways, like this American dream is within reach anymore because they may
basically,
work
just
hard.
to jump in there, basically,
Yeah,
I mean,
please.
back in the days, the promise was when you work really hard, every day tomorrow will be better than the day is today, and you can have your small house or your home or your apartment.
Sure.
That promise is basically off the table right now.
Correct. And so what they're then leaning into and saying, if this isn't achievable, then I want work-life balance. I want flexibility. I want other things to live a whole, well-rounded life. But that's the paradox is we know from inside organizations, we need people to work faster. We need more hours. And that's from a leadership expectation. And so that's the paradox. And I think that is the angst and friction right now. And leaders don't understand the reality of that being out of reach, that, 2.5 white picket fence type family situation, two cars. That is not a reality for many Gen Zers. And yet they're being asked to work more and work harder. And that's the mismatch that I think is happening in organizations today.
Mhm. Excellent. So, how could people now say, when I'm an executive and I say, I need to motivate my team, however, I cannot change the cost of living prices, I cannot change how
Sure.
much a house costs at the moment, and I also cannot raise their salary by 1800%. So, how do I motivate them?
Yeah, fantastic question. So there's the good news is there's so much more than extrinsic motivators when it comes to change management and motivation. Extrinsic motivators like pay, bonus, all of that just has to feel fair to people. It doesn't have People do not evaluate that in absolute terms. But I think the challenge is that leaders have to acknowledge is the inequality between executive pay and worker pay has grown exponentially over the same time period. And so recognizing that and being very transparent about that, I think is really important. But the second thing is Gen Z, more than anyone else, as probably anyone at 25 years old, wants to feel like they're doing something worthwhile, wants to feel like that they're actually contributing something meaningful. They feel like right now the world's on fire. They're really preparing for World War III. And so their mental frame of where work fits in is really different, probably from people like you and I. And so that's where executive leaders have to really move the needle in their organizations. Shareholder wealth maximization is not going to get Gen Z out of bed in the morning. So, what is that purpose? What is that meaning? And then, how do you make sure the second thing that you can do that's low hanging fruit that not enough leaders are doing? Upskilling. Gen Z wants to future proof their careers. They want to work in organizations that feel like they have a learning runway, that they're able to actually go back out into the market employable. So, those are two areas purpose, learning, and development. And by the way, they're not that expensive to do. So, that is to me where I think leaders need to be doubling down today.
Brilliant. Two more questions. When we now say, hey, I want to do all of that, so I want to adapt with AI, I want to lead people, motivate them, close the
Yep.
generational gap, motivate them to do everything. On the other hand, management expects me, or the executives or the board level expects me to decide quickly. And many people say, when uncertainty is so present, a quick
Yep.
decision for me simply feels I'm deciding with knowing 80%, 60%, 40% of what I actually should know, but they expect me to decide right now. But when I'm wrong with the decision, this can have real consequences. How do I
Absolutely.
deal with this uncertainty today when this basically becomes the everyday business to decide in that way?
Yeah. I mean, this might seem somewhat counterintuitive, but what I'm working with executives and board members on is to actually begin to practice to slow down right now. I think in order to slow down is going to help us speed up in the future. My concern is our nervous systems are shot coming out of the pandemic when everything became life and death within organizations. And we started to move at an acceleration that was great for crisis mode. My concern is most industries today are actually not in crisis mode. They're maybe operating in low to no growth environments that might feel like a crisis for some leaders, but it's not a pandemic. It is not some sort of crisis that they're facing. And so my concern is crisis mode is great in the short term. We can make really good decisions in a short period of time, but not for a long period of time. And so decision fatigue is becoming very real in organizations. That ability to constantly be operating out of this nervous system that's in high anxiety mode is not good for long-term decision making. We know from Daniel Kahneman, we've got very limited system two, really good critical thinking skill sets. We have a limited capacity of that. And my concern is we are squandering that in organizations today, whether that's chasing after AI, whether that's doing something that appears to be in panic mode that is not. And so to me, what leaders need to do is stop moving from crisis to crisis, which most times is self-manufactured, fire drill to fire drill, and really begin to get back to good business decision making, strategic thinking, scenario planning, making that work, not just meeting after meeting. I think we've confused that we've got a badge of busyness we're wearing today as leaders, as opposed to saying, no, we've got to slow down and we've got to actually start scenario planning what this future could look like over the next 3 to 6 or 9 months. And I don't see people doing that. We're not being proactive, we're being reactive today in our organizations.
Excellent. Well, now people say, hey, I think Kelly really has a good point here. Maybe we want her to speak at our conference or help us as a
Yeah.
consultant, coach, or trainer. How can people reach out?
Yes. So I have my own advisory company. You can find me at beyondthedesk.com. I've created this whole research advisory company because leadership is so much happening outside the desk, outside the computer, that messy middle. And that's what I'm here to help with from a research perspective. So beyondthedesk.com. And by all means, find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I think these are the perfect final words. So we see changes happening with AI, Gen Z, and accelerated decision making. So now you know who to get in touch with when you actually want to get professional advice on the matter. Dr. Kelly Monahan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.